Hi, I'm Emily Taylor. Today I'm going to talk to you about making a Quilt As You Go project, and to demonstrate I am using these adorable blocks that are made using fabric bundles on my website. So if you're interested in learning more about this little project, you can find it at collagequilter.com. But today we are just going to really focus in on the quilting and how to join these together once they've been quilted. So I'll see you over at my machine. All right, so here we are. I want to just point out that I have a new needle in. This is a Schmetz super non-stick universal needle that's in my machine. I've also just lubed up the machine, and the thread that I'll be using, I started out with the pink thread, but my thread that I recommend when I'm quilting through collage is this Isocord. It's 400 weight polyester, 100% polyester, and it is just much less likely to break than 100% cotton. So I like to change the thread according to which part I'm quilting, and I started with the pink because that's where I'm going to get started. So I generally, when I'm quilting a block like this, you can see that I've pressed the collage on and steamed it to the background fabric. And then I've also made sure that the batting, which is 80-20 batting, is laying, it's larger than the top. And then we've got the backing fabric that also extends beyond the size of the block. So those things are important when we're doing this block or the Quilt As You Go. So we've got the block, and then because it's small, I'm just pinning it together so it stays, relatively tidy as I get going. I'll take the pins out, and so anyway, that's that. Let me just get started here, and you can watch me quilt. All right, now after you have quilted each block, you can see I've got these 4 blocks quilted, and I want to put them together. So the first step to do that is I am just gonna fold back the batting, and I actually just pin it. I press it in place and then pin it so that the back side is exposed. I think we might be blessed by the presence of my little prince, my cat. Let's come up here, Blue. Say hello. Hi. How's my boy? This is Blue. He's my little prince. All of him. This is the only. Are you gonna steal the show? Okay, let's get rid of him. Oh, I love him. Okay, so back to this. Let's see. So we need to make sure that this is free so that we can join it up with the other. Let's see here, like so. Okay, so I've got my 2 pieces like this, and then what I'm going to do is lay them on my cutting mat, maybe even get a ruler and make sure that they're lined up vertically like that, or horizontally across so that it's straight across. And then I'm going to pin these pieces together and create a seam. So let's follow me over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how this step is done. All right, so now here I am at my machine. You can see I've folded over the batting, and the back side of this mini quilt is against the back side of the other one. And we're just gonna stitch along this seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've moved my needle over and I'm just using the edge of the quilt as a guide. You can also, if you need to ensure that it's straight, just use a fabric marker and mark the line. But I feel pretty confident that it's somewhat straight. So now I'm just gonna stitch along this edge. All right, so now I have these sewn together. So we have a really good looking seam in the back, and I'll press that. And then right along here is where we'll do some quilting on the sashing. So now I've pressed everything flat. I've put remember I had this folded back, and now I've pressed everything flat to make sure it looks good. And now what I need to do is just reduce some of this bulk. So if I peel this one back, I can see I really just want one layer of batting to go in that seam area between the two blocks. So I'm gonna just trim that with some scissors, and be very careful not to cut your fabric on the reverse side, the back side. And I'll actually probably just kind of trim up both sides so that I can really control where I'm cutting. Lay that flat, and then do the same thing on this side. And it's okay if I trim, you know, the backing fabric or not. It doesn't matter. Really what I am concerned about is the bulk from the batting. I don't want it to be too bulky in that seam. Oops. Okay, there we go. Now I can take this over to my iron and just press that flat, and then I'll get my binding, or excuse me, my sashing fabric. And what I'm gonna do with this is I'm gonna iron it like this, and then fold it towards the middle on both sides. I'll show it to you in a second, but so it'll be roughly that size, and that will cover the seam on both between all 4 blocks. So let's get to the next. Let me press these and then we'll get to the next step. All right, so now each pair of blocks has been sewn together and the bulk between the seam has been trimmed, and I'm going to now sew each pair to the other pair, or I'm going to sew the pairs together. So doing the same thing, pressing that the excess batting out of the way, and I've pressed it so it's pretty in place. And then I've lined up the backing of each block and made sure that the seams are nested to each other. So I'm just going to take this over to my machine and do exactly the same thing, just stitch right down this row. So I'll be right back. Okay, I've stitched all of the panels together, starting in pairs and then in rows. And here's what it looks like on the back. So you can see the seam is nice and tidy, and it looks beautiful on the back. Now what we're going to do is, and I've trimmed the bulk from all the seams, now what I am going to do is stitch the sashing on. So this is a point where if there's any misalignment in your blocks, you can just hide it with your sashing. So this is really going to make everything look spectacular. Doesn't that look adorable? And so what I'm gonna do, so this is a 3.5 inch strip of fabric, and then I fold it in the middle so I can reach kind of the middle point, and then I fold the edges into that middle, and then I just lay it flat on the top of my quilt, one at a time. I think I'll do this one first. Stitch this on quilted as much as I want, and then I'll do this one, and then I will see you back here. And I think what I'm gonna do is, I think I'm gonna put a border on this quilt that's the same size so that it all looks really symmetrical and beautiful, and it really highlights these darling little quilted collages. So I'll see you again in just a minute. All right, so now the entire quilt has been quilted along with the sashing laid over the seam. Now this actually is, I cut it at 1 3/4 inch and then folded the edges in. So this measures, let's see what this is here. So sorry, this is 1 3/4. It was originally 3 inches wide, and laid that on top of the seam and have quilted that. So I stitched it first and then I quilted it just so that the whole back side is really consistent with the quilting and the seams all match. I've squared up the quilt, and now I've decided I want to put on some borders to match the sashing. So the way I'm going to do this is so I've cut this at 2 inches because this is 1 3/4 inch, and I've cut this at 2 inches. I will lay this on the edge of the quilt, and then I've also cut fabric for the backing, and I will slide that up. And now what I'll do is I will stitch along this edge right here with a scant 1/4 inch seam. Then when I've done that on each side, I will fold it over and press, and then slide in a smaller piece of the batting. And then that will allow me so it will keep a consistent bulk. And then I'll be finished and I will add binding. So we'll go to that point and I'll show you what it looks like with the border, and I'll be back in a minute. So here I am. I've applied that piece, and I'm gonna just match up the batting to the edge there. And now fold that over and take it over to my machine, and I'm just gonna stitch there to make sure I've got that together, and then we'll do the additional sides. All right, so I have this all finished up. I added the border and it was sandwiched with the backing fabric and a thin strip of the batting. If you want measurements, you can get all that information from my blog, but that was the technique that I showed you. And then look at the back. Doesn't that look nice and tidy? It's all been quilted, so great Quilt As You Go technique and how to add a border. So now this is ready to either bind or put a facing on, but it's a cute little fun project. You can find this for free on my website at collagequilter.com. And I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial about Quilt As You Go. Thanks for joining me.